Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along today. Let me restart by saying buenas tardes, damas y caballeros, y bienvenidos a Conversaciones con Al McFarlane. Y hoy día es muy importante porque estamos hablando de el Cuban Film Festival. Comes up at the end of the month and next month. And today I have the pleasure, tengo el placer de conversar con mis hermanos, Greg Klave y Franklin Curbelo. They are the engines, the energy behind the annual Cuban Film Festival. We're going to talk about the festival. We want to invite you, and from time to time, we'll try to do things in a way that's bilingue, and have some fun. We may be being joined by a couple of my colleagues. I sent a notice out to my friend who joined us last week, and that is Antonio Rosel, el peruano que vive aquí. Y también sent a note out to our colleague in Bahia. Tú sabes, ¿cómo se dice? Yoji, maestre Yoji Sena, que vive en Bahía, en Brasil. Y también hemos mandado un link a nuestro escritor en Colombia, en Caracas, Venezuela, Jesús Chucho García. Pues vamos a we're going to have a good time. Vamos a hablar y vamos a discutir the films from the Afro-Cuban Film Festival, the Cuban Film Festival coming up. First of all, Franklin and Greg, brothers, good afternoon. Welcome to the program. Good to see you both again.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us on your show.
Well, thank you. Let's start by giving the dates and the particulars and describe what's available coming up in the upcoming film festival, the Minnesota Cuban Film Festival.
All right. I'm going to start, telling you that this is the 15th year that we are having a festival. So this is quite a, but we are very proud, but we're humble too. But it won't be possible with the support of what a lot of people that have over the year has, but they believe, what we're doing and believe, about the importance of film to be able, but they give, Twin Cities a different, but the look about what the Cuba life is all about. So the first film is going to start on the 28th of February. And after that, we're going to have, about the 5 consecutive Thursdays after that in March and in April. So the closing of the festival will be April 4th. So again, the opening will be February 28th, and the closing will be April 4th.
Greg, have you screened all these films so far personally yourself yet, or not yet?
It's a committee process where we've screened most of the films ourselves, but the access to Cuban films is rather restricted in the United States because of the blockade and the U.S. government trying to keep the truth about Cuba from the American people. And so it's a process that we have to go over many hurdles and obstacles to be able to get the films as well as preview them. But we have we have a committee that's involved in the selection process, and we have very good communication and trust each other to make the best decision. And we feel we've got an absolute incredible selection of Cuban films that everybody will find particular value in screening this upcoming 15th annual Cuban Film Festival.
Let me tell people a little bit about you, my friends, my brothers. Greg Klave went on his 4th trip to Cuba in 2010, and he was studying there with the Cuban Film Institute, studying the culture and industry of Cuban cinema. And then when he came back, he brought some Cuban films to help the Institute feature and present in the first Minnesota Cuban Film Festival. And he's been involved ever since, as Franklin said, 15 years now. This is the 15th annual festival. And at his side has always been Franklin Curbelo at the helm, who is a curator and promoter. And then my friend Franklin, we know him as the owner of a company called Acentos Incorporated. He's a translator, interpreter company, but also in his leadership role at the Minnesota Cuban Film Festival as curator and coordinator. He also was involved in a project called Live Wire. He was a producer, and that was a project associated with the Minneapolis Television Network in the 90s. And at the same time, he was producing Full Circle at Carrie Levin. He's also a videographer. So, you guys are steeped in the culture and in the craft of filmmaking and of documenting and representing. And as you described, Greg, telling the truth, telling the story about Cuba that is not being allowed to arise here. So let me ask you both, why was it important to create the Cuban Film Festival? Greg, you start, and then Franklin, come on.
Yes. I believe that art and culture is a beautiful way to connect people, and especially the expression of the spirit of a country or a society. And I believe that by showing these films that portray Cubans as they live, as they are, rather than a Hollywood portrayal of Cuba, was very important for people to understand what Cuba is about, their culture, their special importance that they play on human rights, democracy, education, healthcare, etc., was through film. And that's why I started this project, and adding not only screening the films, but having discussions after each film.
Right. I just wanted to add that one of the first things that Fidel did after about the triumph of the revolution was the creation of the Cuban Film Institute. That was one of it was a very seminal group. And after that, I consider that in the 60s the golden years of filmmaking, which make waves, only in Cuba, throughout the world. Mm-hmm. Great, but the filmmakers were able, to portray, kind of following, the tradition of the avant-garde and, cinema verita, and even the Russian, filmmaker. But they were able, to integrate all those, the genres and create a very unique Cuba filmmaking style that is still reverberates today. So this is very important to highlight.
Well, so Franklin, what was Cuban film like before the revolution? And I'm sure it must have mirrored society, which meant it was some kind of mirror to the idea and the ideation of Hollywood, and that representing the presentation of colonial and imperial and cultural chauvinism from Europe, imposing that as the lingua franca, or as the standard for life in Cuba, despite the fact that most Cubans are not Europeans. So what was happening in film before, and how did Comandante Fidel's charge in creating the Institute change things?
Right. Yeah, Greg, I think, you would be, the person, to address that. I think,
Yeah. So the history of the portrayal of the Cuban society was basically from the viewpoint of Hollywood. And so you would often have an American or a European be the protagonist in the films, in an exotic society or exotic environment, with some kind of swashbuckling or romantic portrayal happening in the film. And what the Cuban Film Institute, that was created right after the revolution, intention was to turn the view around so that now it would be the Cuban people, or the film that would be portrayed would be of the Cuban protagonist. And it might be a farmer, it might be a teacher, it might be a doctor, but they turned it around. And what they did was, in the very beginning, the Cuban Film Institute sent out trucks to the countryside, and they showed the film, the Charlie Chaplin film, Modern Times, to the people in the countryside who had never seen films before. They even looked behind the screen that they set up in the little towns to see how people could be action figures on the screen. But they looked at it, and as they were watching the film, they had filmmakers making a film of the people watching the film. And they created a film called For the First Time.
Right.
And they brought that film back to those people, and they said, now you are the protagonist. And they began to build a society that viewed cinema from they being the protagonist. And it turned cinema around, not only in Latin America, but around the world. It created a new way of viewing, of creating films. And so, as Franklin said, that exploded in the number of films and the impact it had on the society. And it created a society that now has one of the highest cinema-going populations in the world. And they see cinema from all around the world. And they're very, very critical of what they see, and they, analyze films very critically, very much different than the entertainment-packed films that Hollywood produces today. So, yeah, that was kind of what happened with Cuban film in the very beginning. Fidel was a part of that. It was a whole collection of artists that were part of that wanted to make Cuban film a creation of the Cuban society, and to showcase the Cuban society, the uniqueness of Cuban society, where Africa, Europe, and the Americas all came together, the blending of a culture into one.
Great. My friend and colleague, Yoji Sena, has joined us from Bahia. Yoji, let's bring you on the stage and jump in the conversation. Good to see you, first of all. And jump in the conversation.
Greetings. Hi, Franklin.
No, Franklin.
Nice to see you again, brother.
Oi, oi.
Oi, 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 oi. So many years. Hi, Greg.
Hey, Oi.
Yes. It's funny, you guys are talking about the Cuban Film Festival. Our Minister of Culture, Margarete Menezes, was just in Cuba, stretching the links between our cultures. Margarete Menezes is a Bahian popular singer that was appointed by Lula to be his culture minister, and she was actively working in Cuba last week. So,
yes, they have the Latin American Film Festival is one of the biggest film festivals in Latin America, and it brings filmmakers and artists from around Latin America and the Americas all the Americas together in December. It runs like the first 2 weeks of December. And it's a great showcase for what's happening in the Latin African diaspora.
Greg, I was going to ask you, you mentioned that the government brought the Chaplin film around to communities all over the island and invited people to come and watch the Charlie Chaplin production, but they filmed the people watching, and they created a product, and you said the product was called The Beginning. What was it called again?
The first time.
The first time.
For the first time.
So let's talk about that. What did that mean? What was the intention, and what was behind that language, the wording, and the meaning of for the first time? What do you think?
I think what it represented was the connection from rural Cuba, which was so isolated and had was so, I would say, backwards. The most amount of illiterate people, the poorest people, it connected them to the world. They had not been connected to the world. They didn't see past their own community. And now they were connected to the world. Now they were the protagonist in the world. And
they became the
what
center.
That meant is they saw outside of their boundaries, their island boundaries, and saw that they were connected to humanity. And it was the beginning of the growth of solidarity with all humanity. And if anybody knows the history of Cuba, it's that connection and that solidarity with humanity, and the sharing of whatever little they have with humanity, that's put them in a spot that no other small country like that, with such limited resources and so isolated, could be in. And we could go on and on about its effect on the societies of Latin America, as well as Africa and Asia.
Yoji, have you been to Cuba yet? You've not been to Cuba?
No, I never had the pleasure. I always I wanted, but I always was scared it would repercut in my green card.
And then Franklin and Yoji, how have you guys navigated the mechanics of being regular visitors? Because I think a lot of people responded to the same as Yoji, and that is questioning if my travel is legal. I know there are study groups and study tours, and there were periods of time when there was less restriction, and I think that's kind of gone back, and there's more difficulty as we speak right now. Am I correct? Or what have you all had to do, and what have Americans had to do to be part of it, to gain an experience in Cuba?
Yeah, Greg, talk about the travel groups, what they organize, and that's the famous check mark, by helping the Cuban people, so talk about the groups, that they're organizing trips, and how even though there are restrictions, but you still can't go to Cuba.
Yeah. Right now, during the Obama administration, they started a normalization process which allowed Americans to go to Cuba if they checked off a box called people-to-people programs. It's now called Support of the Cuban People. And so you still can get a plane ticket to Havana, and also 4 other cities in Cuba. Now it's opened up a little bit more. And when you buy your ticket, all you have to do is check off one of 10 boxes. Some are for academic studies, some are for journalism, some are for sports events, but you would just check off a box for the support the Cuban people, and that's all it takes to go down there. The thing is that it's the process has not been very much marketed in the United States, so people still think there's prohibitions and there's restrictions to going to Cuba, but there isn't. And you can still go down there, and it's for affordable prices. And there's many groups that go down there. We have a number of groups in the Twin Cities here that go down for people-to-people groups where they would go on independent tours to different areas, parts of the Cuban society, whether it's meeting with dancers, filmmakers, doctors, teachers, going to senior citizen centers, going to farms, going to cooperatives, going to the theater, or even having free time to just roam around and talk to anybody you would like to. So those are structured groups, but they're independently. They're structured by Americans for Americans who want to get a taste of Cuban society. But you could even go down as a person that's bringing like healthcare supplies or some kind of supplies to people, so that you'd have a reason for going down there. But it's still illegal for you to go down as a tourist.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
what does that mean for currency and for using U.S. currency in Cuba?
Yes. Before, you couldn't use U.S. currency down there. It's because of the United States has a financial lock on the world financial system. It was not allowing Cuba to be able to trade dollars for other international currency on the international financial market. But now Cuba allows US dollars only because those US dollars are used in the private entrepreneurial business section to bring in goods, a limited amount of goods for private businesses to resell in Cuba to people who have the income to buy those kinds of products. So it's kind of like it's economy that hasn't been something that Cuba wanted to dictate, but has only been created because of the blockade of Cuba and what they've had to do to get around that blockade on the use of the international financial system. So if there's a way, Cubans invent a way to get around it.
They make it happen. Franklin, would you walk us through each of the films that you created? We can pull up the slide for each one, and you can give us a snapshot of each story.
Okay. Well, the opening film, we selected that one because we think it's a great introduction, to the beginning of the revolution. This is called, the Black Box or La Caja Negra. And it paints a slow-burning love story in the years immediately following the Cuban Revolution. The Black Box is a secret diary written by Elsa and read by her granddaughter several decades later. So this is a very interesting film. How about the filmmaker is able to weave, about the footage and the history, the revolution into the life, the granddaughter, who actually discovered the diary that her grandmother, written, and is able, to somehow her mind will live and transform her life. So that's an interesting about the part of it. So through about reading the diary, she goes through a kind of a transformation and a realization about the history, about Cuba. So I recommend it highly, that the particular film, because it kind of features footage very rarely seen outside Cuba from the beginning of the revolution. Okay. So that's a great film to see. Now, the next one is by our friend Fernando Perez. Is a great.
I lost your audio, Franklin, for a second.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
The next one is Nelsito's World. Franklin, are you back now?
Yeah. Am I?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead, Franklin.
Okay. Nelsito he has about disability and is bedridden, and her mother watching over him, and she's a painter. And he painted detailed images of Castro's great big eyes, frozen in time and suffocating. And then Nelsito, being bedridden, he longed to be able to connect to the outside world. One day the door of the house is open, and he's able to sneak out, but he about to suffer an accident. And so at that point, then he started to imagining things. And I'm gonna read some comments that the director Fernando Perez wrote. He say that the world, Nelsito, is like a puzzle that plays with many structures, and only at the end, after an hour and a half of screening, you will be able to put together the entire puzzle. It's a film that doesn't allow a traditional narrative structure, but there is where the challenges are. Until now, this film has been shown to different audiences, and I've been able to know that there are three ways to perceive it. There is a group that, thinks that the movie is good, and they have understood it. Then there is another group that like the movie, but think it's good, but they haven't understood it at all. And the third group that neither likes nor understand it. You can choose in which group you want to be. The only thing that I ask you is to remain in the theater, because it's really at the end that the movie, I think, makes more sense. So that give you an insight about how he was able to construct that film. Very well acted, and I think it will delight a lot of individuals. You want to add something else, Greg, about Nelsito's World?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that the director, Fernando Perez, is world-renowned. He's a veteran filmmaker. We've shown a number of his films, and usually it's to a sellout crowd. So that's another film that you definitely want to put on your list to get to. And that first film, The Black Box, is done by a newer filmmaker, one of the newer independent filmmakers, Kiki Alvarez. Again, we're having a mix of films from veteran filmmakers and new filmmakers.
Right, yeah. And say, Greg, would you like, to talk about the Castro Spy, which is the next film?
Yes. This is a film, Castro Spies, a very interesting story. This is a story about Cuban agents that were sent to Florida to prevent terrorism against the Cuban people. So they were anti-terrorists. This happened at the same time of Elian Gonzalez. And of course, we all remember, those of us who were living then, remember the tale of Elian Gonzalez and how he threw a boat where all the other family members died in crossing the Florida Straits to Florida. He was the only one left. And he was brought here by his mother, who didn't have permission from the father to bring him to the United States. And the father wanted him back. But his relatives in Florida wouldn't let the father bring him back to Cuba.
Right.
And of course, this went through the U.S. judicial system, and the U.S. justice system said, no, the law says the boy must go back to his biological father. And the whole country was involved in this saga through the media. And the American people vastly supported connecting this boy back to his biological father, who wanted him to come back to Cuba. Now, on the other end, these agents who came to the United States to infiltrate terrorist groups in southern Florida, who were planting bombs in tourist hotels in order to scare away tourism from Cuba, their story of preventing terrorism was kept from the American people. And this created an incredible story that everyone will want to learn about, because it has adventure and losing one's identity, and then being caught up in the prison system of the United States, and finally being one of the how would I say elements that created normalization between the United States and Cuba that Obama started in 2014. So this is a very, very incredible story that tells a lot about U.S.-Cuba relations.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, the Cuban Five, that's how we know what they become known all over the world, the Cuban Five. They were sent to observe and infiltrate multiple Cuban-American groups, such as Alpha 66, the F4 Commanders, the Cuban-American National Foundation, and Brothers to the Rescue, all based in the Miami area. And, the members of the Cuban Five were eventually arrested in September 1998 and later convicted in Miami with charges of conspiracy to commit espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, acting as an agent of a foreign government, as well as other illegal activities in the United States. All trumped up charges. They were not, about doing that. They were just trying, to preserve their life and try to infiltrate this group that they were plotting, but they murdered, Cuban people. So that when, about the attorneys, for the Cuban Five asking, to change the venue, because no way they were going to be having a fair trial in Miami. Right. They denied that. One of them, was convicted of 2 life terms plus 13 years. So they were able, but while in prison, they were model prisoners. They were able, to act, earning the respect. They were teaching, other inmates, about, the Cuban reality. So all over the world, there was, a campaign to try to free the Cuban Five. We ourselves, we did our part. One of Guerrero, the Cuban Five, actually learned how to paint in prison. And he created a series of, about the paintings that later becomes, about the an exhibit that we did a couple of times right here in Twin Cities. So and actually we save, those paintings, and we might be able, to show it at the theater when people come in, to. But so the Cuban Five, story is something that you should read about it because it's so intriguing, and it show, and and of course Fidel say, "Don't worry, when they will come back," and they did come back, but of course they pay a dear price for that. But they are heroes. They're heroes, but they in Cuba. So that's what I wanted to say about the Castro Spies.
How about the next film, March 21, Viva?
Viva is an interesting film, very, very, very well acted. It's about this, about the sensitive, gay, about the hairdresser, that they dreamed, to become, to sing and to be on the stage as a drag queen, so to speak. But there was a lot about the issues, about the trying to do that. His father was, very, macho guy, former boxer, and actually, but it was rumored they have killed someone, and then, but obviously he couldn't stand, to have a gay son. So that's kind of about the East, about the conflict between father and son. But the performance of the main character is a superb. I recommend it highly. It's an Irish film, Irish Cuban film, and it's a very, very well done with a great music and a great story. So I recommend it highly, Viva. And that will be playing on the 14th of March.
I'm Al
No,
McFarlane.
I'm sorry. Let's see. No, it will be the 21.
21, yeah, Viva.
Yeah.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Yo soy Al McFarlane. Está escuchando a Conversaciones con Al McFarlane. My guest, Greg Klave, Minnesota Cuba Committee, Franklin Curbelo, Minnesota Cuban Film Festival coordinator, and my colleague, Yoji Sena, editor of Afrodescendientes, who joins us from Bahia, Brazil. And we're talking about the Minnesota Cuban Film Festival. Comes up. We've gone through about 4, I think, or 6 of them. Let's go through the last 2. This is really interesting. I'm glad that you're able to give us this commentary and to, sort of help us prioritize things we need to look at. So what are the next 2?
Well, the next 2 is it's called, Sister of the Heart. This is a story by this group of nuns, black nuns, that created about the school, the Oblate Sister School, for about the for children's, about in Cuba. So by the way, the director is a good friend of ours. It's called Gloria Orlando. She does, about a tremendous work about research in those films. And actually, he created a documentary, which is 3-part documentary on that, on the work of the Oblate Sisters of the Providence. What they did, about in Cuba, especially, about for Black, about the girls and boys, which is very important at that time in the journey, the 19th century. Let me see, mid 19th century towards the end of 19th century, because Cuba at that time was a very classist and racist society. So the work the nuns were very important to be able not only to teach them how to read and write, but actually to be better human beings to contribute to that society, despite of the racism that there was prevalent at that time. So we're not going to show the 3-part because it will be too long. We're only going to show 2 parts. but that will give kind of a very interesting background how we initiated and how important until they have to leave and the beginning of the revolution because there was some, I wouldn't call it persecution, but there was some hostility against the Catholic churches and so on. But again, this is an interesting film, and it's about black Cuban nuns, about doing their work at that time.
And the last one, Havana Blues.
The last one, I'm gonna let about Greg, about talk about Havana Blues.
Yeah. Havana Blues is a story about the immigration of Cuban people from the island, based again on the conditions that the U.S. blockade has created. Of course, the intention of the U.S. blockade from the very beginning was to, in the words of the administration that wrote the reason for the blockade, was to starve and deprive the Cuban people so that they would become so upset that they would overthrow their government. And so those conditions that's been created has not allowed people to increase their standard of living and make the kind of income that would increase that standard of living. This is a story about musicians, and of course the world recognizes the music, the dance, the incredible culture that Cuba has created as a result of it being at the crossroads of European, African, and the American societies. And these artists have a choice of staying in Cuba and not having a standard of living that they see other people from Europe and the Americas have, and immigrating to Europe, where they would have to change some of their music to meet the taste of European audiences, right, and leave behind some of their Cubanismo. Mm-hmm. And so this group of musicians has to make that decision. Should we go as a group, or should we stay with our families? Right. Do we go and get more money in Europe, or do we stay and stay with Cuban culture and grow our Cubanismo? So it's a very music-oriented film with lots of dancing and singing and music, and a lot of turmoil between the members of the band and their family members. So always, the last film of the Cuban Film Festival is a music-oriented film, and we expect a big audience for that, and a lot of tapping feet, and yeah, and hopefully at the end of it we'll have a real nice closing party. Mm-hmm. We have some local Cuban bands that have offered to play at the end of the film if we can find a venue.
Right.
So
Al, let me about that before we switch, because my mind about is what your word you use, the Afro descendant. I just want to read about the some comments that Gloria Rolando made about that. And she said, when we talk about the African diaspora, sometimes people don't know very much about what happened in the history of the Caribbean. And Cuba is a Caribbean island and share many destinies with other Caribbean countries. Even if we speak Spanish and others speak French or English, we have many things in common. So I think that the expectation, the interest, and the reaction that I see and U.S. audiences are because people want to know what happened with the rest of the blacks in the continent. Through my films, they get a little bit. I cannot cover in a documentary of 1 hour the whole complexity of the history of the Caribbean countries, of our history as Black people. But at least people can get some elements that allow them continue studying and doing more research, especially the young generation. So that is Gloria. So one day you will have, about the opportunity to have a nice, about conversation with her, and you can see that, how attuned you are, with, her, her thoughts.
So Franklin,
Yes.
could you triangulate a connection to talk to her?
I certainly will. By the way, she is working in a documentary that is going to make, about waves. She's, about doing a research right now to do a documentary about the Buffalo Soldiers. Talking about that, what they were in Cuba. So that is a tremendous work, about what she's doing. So just, about waiting a year or two, I'm pretty sure that we're going to have, the African Soldier film right here in the Twin Cities.
Awesome. So you mentioned what we're doing with Afrodescendientes. Why don't you pull up that Franklin Cooper, pull up the slide, and not if you can make it larger or not, but you all, and I'm grateful to you, arranged for my interview with Liz Olivia Fernandez. And this was the product of that. What a wonderful and powerful artist and creative. And talk about her work, how that connection exists. And before the show, Greg, we're talking about possibilities for the future, right? Finding connections. Right. But she represents, what we talked about was, what would it be like if the Black Press of America, for example, decided to hold its annual winter meeting, which they usually hold somewhere either in the South or the Caribbean. Right. They held it in Jamaica. But what if we were able to arrange for that to happen in Cuba? And you mentioned that the organization she works with is one that would help facilitate some interaction between Afro-Latino, Afrodescendente communicators. What do you think about that? But thank you, first of all, and talk about her work and her tour here.
Yeah, so Liz Fernandez Oliva is a journalist who wanted to, again, turn the paradigm of journalism upside down. So she calls the journalism of the Western world parachute journalism. And what that means is when a Western-oriented journalist comes to a foreign country, they pretty much are parachuting into that country and seeing and describing what's going on, writing the story from their view only, not knowing much about how that society works, what effect Western countries or colonial powers have on underdeveloped country. She's turning that upside down. Now she's a journalist who's coming to the United States and telling people how the United States affects Cuba. And then she's investigating, why is that? Why is there this policy that affects smaller countries and countries of the global South, countries of color in the United, how that policy is created and how it affects those people. So she's turning the, how would you say, the microscope around, or the around, so that people get a different view. And I think anybody that's reading books by people of color, newspapers by people of color, films that are made by people of color, get a more broader spectrum of the truth. And that's what we're trying to increase our connection between the Black American Journalistic Society and the Latin American Journalistic Society, so that more of the truth can be read by everybody. And so people begin to understand the, how would I say, that the detriments of a one-sided policy that doesn't look at how it affects the people that are the victims of that policy.
And I think you're being kind in giving oppressor regimes a little grace, because I think that we feel and know that people are fully aware and fully intentional, and they really are acting in what they perceive to be their interests, but they want to always hide the impact of the damage of their perversion, of their excessive hoarding of an extraction of both human and material resources of the planet to advantage their minority and to the detriment of the majority, and particularly people of the global South. Yoji, ¿qué piensas? What do you think? And as you monitor this discussion, what thoughts come to mind? How do we increase our ability to talk to each other and collaborate throughout the diaspora, particularly as Afrodescendientes? ¿Qué piensas?
Well,
O en inglés, cualquier.
okay. I'm gonna do it in English. So today is starting the G20 conference of the foreign ministers here in Brazil, and in this year, for the first time, is the addition of African Union as a member. So it's become G21, and you know that Brazil right now it is in a big diplomatic role with Israel because of the words that were said by Lula a few days ago, where he compared what's happening in Gaza with the Holocaust. So Brazil is very focused in this idea. For example, here in Bahia, the perception of African culture is really dominant right now here, as the identity, as the official identity. So as the government of the state, the government of the municipality, it is constantly taking to themselves this identity. So it's, for example, Salvador, the Afro capital. It is like official policy. So this sense of Pan-Africanism in connection with all other brothers and sisters throughout the Americas and as well in Africa, it's stronger than ever, you know. And I think you know it's gonna just improve in the future, even though we are under assault by the right wing here in Brazil and elsewhere, you know. But I think the way it is, it's like I was listening to the description, for example, of this movie of this lady, and I was dreaming what could it be, because here, for example, you guys are the Cuban festival. I've been researching these things a lot. For example, Bahia and Cuba has a very strong connection that Cubans are, I think, not, they don't have two Brazilians, Bahians here, particularly Bahia and Cuba. We a very strong connection through African religion, right? It's known by you guys that Santeria, it's exactly candomblé, right? And both are a version of Isese or Ifa of the Yoruba people. but there were, why it is Santeria in Cuba, why there is Candomblé here in Bahia. In 1830s, there were sent 6 princesses out of Yoruba land right after the dismissal of the Oyo Empire. So 3 went to Cuba and 3 went to Bahia. Here, 1830s, if people who studied, also it's approximately the year of foundation of Santeria in Cuba, right? And in Bahia, it's when it started. So it's this strong connection. It's like one, it's a version of the other in Spanish and in Portuguese, right? How we speak Portuguese, it's with a lot of diminutives, a lot of African expressions. So one of my kind of regrets I have is being that I've never been to Cuba to be able to experience. But yeah, I'm very optimistic. You know, I'm a generally very optimistic person. Yes.
And we're down to the last couple of minutes, Franklin and Greg. Any thoughts, impressions, Franklin?
Just want to, about to remind the listeners about the 15th Minnesota Cuban Film Festival, which opened February 28th, and then it goes all the way to April 4th. Just, there are a selection of films. They come to one or to all, but do come and join us. We're gonna have quite a feast together. And by the way,
we did not mention the venue. Where will the films be?
Oh, by the way, that will be what is called now the main cinema, which is by the river, by the Minneapolis, by the Minneapolis St. Paul Society, Film Society is our partner. So we are, having, the films screened there. By the way, did we play, about the trailer already?
No, we have time for that. Let's play the trailer. I forgot about that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we can close with the trailer.
Let's do that. And thank you guys.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
We want to thank KFAI for supporting and promoting the Cuban Film Festival. And if people listen to Corazon Latino on Friday, they'll have a chance to win 2 free tickets to each week's film.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay.
I'd like to thank Franklin before you go too, since we are here publicly. Like you, Al, he was one of the persons that helped me greatly when I arrived in the U.S. Embraced me. So thank you, Franklin.
Let's play the
You're in
trailer.
my heart.
Great, thank you, trailer Cooper. Let's close with the trailer and see you guys later. Let's do more as the festival unwinds. We'll come back and review film by film. Okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you, Al.